Josh, we've done so many videos on the state of Xbox, and I promise there's not an agenda. There genuinely is not. We have the consoles. We've been with them for decades at this point. I do genuinely want what's best for the Xbox Massif, but they keep putting quotes out there from veteran sources talking about how Xbox themselves have no idea what the hell they're doing. The most recent one coming from Spawnwave, the podcast over on Spawnwave's channel, where Bloomberg's Jason Schreier was being interviewed as part of that podcast, and they started talking about Xbox, and Schreier said, Xbox is such a mess right now. I feel like their plan is changing every single year. Right now they're talking about teasing handheld over and over again, but who knows? A year ago they were saying Indiana Jones was never coming to PlayStation. They change their minds every month. They're just a disaster over there. It's really sad. Now, obviously over the last sort of couple of years, there have been various talking points in regards to Phil Spencer's leadership and the way that Xbox have tried to pivot into live service stuff. You've got the Game Pass module, live streaming, and doing xCloud and things like that. But thoughts on the severity of the mess?
Yeah, I mean, when you start getting quotes like this from, like you say, like veterans in the industry, people who know a lot about a lot of stuff, it just kind of solidifies what I think a lot of us already thought about, you know, Xbox over the past 12 months. And again, no agenda at all. Like, I own an Xbox Series X. I want excuses to play it. I want Game Pass all the time.
Because we care. Like, genuinely. We have the systems. We're following this industry. We're going to talk about it.
Literally, exactly like that. And, you know, when someone's on the downturn, like Xbox has been over the past few months and has been making all of these decisions and has been pivoting in a way that is very visible from even the casual perspective and someone outside the business, it is a big talking point because you invest in consoles. Like, as fans, you invest in consoles, and even though you might not want to, you invest in brands. You buy an Xbox Series X like we did at launch in the hopes that they have a long-term vision for that console. You buy an Xbox One with the hopes that they have a long-term vision for the console, and then even back then, you know, they're pivoting away from television to a focus on the actual box itself to Game Pass. And now, with all of these acquisitions and with all of these changes in direction, it feels like a brand that right now, and there's not many of these admittedly, but a brand that you can't really trust because, yeah, you get Phil Spencer earlier in the year talking about things not going multi-platform, then going multi-platform, and then using language that gives them a lot of leeway if they decide later on to go multi-platform, but that still annoys people. And it's a real question of where is the vision? And where is it coming from? Is it coming from Phil Spencer still? Is it coming from Microsoft? Is it coming from another external voice? Like, what is their plans? What are their plans for the rest of the generation? Because right now, I don't know, and sorry to keep rambling, but it reminds me of something that you mentioned in your great Ubisoft vid from last week.
And there's some actual reporting.
He did.
Go check it out.
Good. And that's that, like, a bunch of sources, including the ones that you talked about in that video, are talking about Ubisoft having a similar issue where every 12 months it seems like they're changing focus. They're going for quadruple A games, that it's live service games, that it's free-to-play games or whatever. And, like, that just impacts every single studio working under that umbrella because games take 4, 5, 6, 7 plus years to make. And if you're changing the direction of the overall company every 12 months, how can that not impact the end result that those developers are working on and trying to accommodate to the grander vision, like, every year or so?
I wonder where we end up with this. We'll talk about the handheld stuff in a sec because there was the whole pivot into Game Pass. Then they finally seemed like they were getting various first-party titles off the ground. Indiana Jones was mentioned. Starfield came out, obviously a bit of a divisive reception to that, but there's the DLC for that is actually out like this week. And I think the general conversation on Starfield has come like, okay, I'll play it when it gets a little bit better. Like, Bethesda committed to putting out various improvements. They wanted to improve the maps in the game. They want to add vehicles, things like that. But it seemed like the games were slowly starting to come in. However, the business side of it, the business mentalities that are governing all of it, seem to directly be in the way of that. Like, Xbox started the year getting rid of Tango Gameworks, and one of the only studios that they had that had won BAFTAs and were a big talking point in the industry. And it seemed like they never really recovered from that. You know, there's so many layoffs as well. We've reported on this quite a lot across the year.
We just had some more across the weekend, right? At Activision.
It's ridiculous. Yeah, it's ridiculous. And obviously at the beginning when that massive acquisition went through, part of that conversation was that nothing would change. And that seems to nearly always be the case with giant acquisitions, is that someone comes in, the money people come in and go, well, we don't actually need this wing of the business and we'll get rid of it. But it doesn't feel like it's in, for the greater good or anything. Whenever Phil Spencer is pressed on this, he just says that, it's the reality of running a business, and because they're under Microsoft, they need to make sure that they're operating in a certain way that fits Microsoft's goals. And a lot of that comes from, at least assumedly, the acquisitions in the first place. If you're taking $70 billion from your father's pocket, he's going to want to know what it's responsible for and how you're going to pay it back. Now, that bottom line did then come from acquiring Call of Duty, but the focus is barely there. And now we've got this push into handheld stuff, which I guess is a continuation of the Game Pass model and just being like, okay, what if you just had a handheld that streamed Game Pass or played those games? I don't know if that's it. I don't know if that's the thing at this point. And they haven't even done right by all the studios that they've bought up, or the Game Pass model, the streaming model, like trying to have a cadence of exclusives. None of the promises have come true. And I'm not saying it in an angry way. It is in a general ineptitudinal way where it's like, are you not fulfilling anything that you're putting forward at this point?
You know what? I saw a clip doing the rounds of the weekend from Colin Moriarty's podcast.
Sacred Symbols.
Sacred Symbols. And he was talking there, and he made a point that I've been sort of internalizing over the past weekend, and that was that Xbox going forward, I think he said like the die is cast in that they're not really competition for PlayStation anymore. Like that era of them going directly head to head like doesn't seem to be the thing that's going to define both companies going forward, because Xbox, even before this, have pivoted and sort of like, I mean, Phil Spencer even said a few years ago that his biggest competition was the likes of Amazon and Google and kind of like those big tech conglomerates, not someone like PlayStation or even Sony. And I think that's becoming more true. I kind of don't want to admit that because I love the competition between those two companies. I think it's what helps innovation and what drives each company to try to be more consumer friendly in a really strange way. Because honestly, even though Sony isn't like hitting home runs at this moment in time, we've done a lot of videos on them and a lot of podcasts on them as well.
A video called Sony Have Lost Their Mind.
Exactly that.
You want to go watch that.
A lot of those issues, they haven't come from the Microsoft camp. They haven't come from any direct competition. It's kind of come from Sony shooting themselves in the foot, you know, making the PS5 Pro $700, having their own internal layoffs that have obviously been controversial and we've, you know, not liked as well. They're pivoting to live service. Everything that has been informed by their own internal approaches, not what Xbox has been doing and kind of responding to the market in that sense. And I think that's a shame because Nintendo for the longest time has had huge success being its own island, and that's been really cool. But it has also, you know, not to come in and just slander every single company, but that's also had its issues with that model because it is a kind of monopoly in and of itself of what it does, and it doesn't have that direct competition, so it is allowed to dictate the marketplace in a way that I guess Sony and Microsoft until now haven't really been able to do. But if then Microsoft pivots into, like you said, not really being a hardware competitor and publishing their games on other platforms and pivoting into handhelds, finding their own niche, that will probably be good for them, but will it be good for the industry if all of these companies don't really have that direct competition?
It's interesting talking about the companies' identities as well, because I feel like if you're a Nintendo customer, like, you know, and you are part of Nintendo Switch Online, you watch the Nintendo Directs, you're subscribed to those services, and you get those selections of games delivered to you, like here's an N64 bundle, and then here's Animal Crossing, and here's Splatoon, and like you feel for the most part catered to and seen by the company, even though it is this big conglomerate and whatever. Still, that feels like you're part of an ecosystem. That feels like you're seen by that company and you're being catered to. And Nintendo are infamous for taking advantage of that stuff, like when you're putting Mario 64's remaster on sale for like 5 months or whatever it was. But for the most part, it feels like you're part of that ecosystem. PlayStation lost a bit of that during the Jim Ryan era, but have massively regained it across the last year or so under the new leadership, and then doing things like putting Dino Crisis and Legacy of Kain on PlayStation Plus, Time Splitters, you know, making sure that they communicate things better. Like, yes, they still are the market leader in regards to, especially going up against Xbox, so they do have blunders right alongside, like the £700 PS5 Pro, but there's a reason that graph of we're so back, we're gone, we're so back exists, because they keep doing the good stuff as well. Xbox hasn't had a identifiable ecosystem since the 360 days, and they've really struggled. And I've had it at the Xbox One since day one. Like, I've had all that stuff and a Series X and everything else. Since they got more in line with the Windows, the Microsoft model of like a Windows Phone style interface and Windows UI, and the way that the dashboard went across the 360 era, that stripped out a lot of the identity of Xbox. And you can literally go and watch Xbox's own 20th anniversary documentary that they put out on their official YouTube channel for a play-by-play of how that all rolled out, the original figureheads of Xbox slowly moving away from that stuff across the 2000s, the end of the 2000s. And I feel like they've really struggled for that. And so to pivot that, to go even wider with that, people who stick with Windows do so because of the functionality. I don't think they feel very warm and seen by Windows. And Xbox has become the Windows machine. And it's not that you can't get great things out of it and good deals, and indies can get their games on Game Pass. But I think that is a very much a permeable feeling when you're interacting with the Xbox ecosystem, is that it's barely Xbox anymore.
I think it's a good point. Yeah, it is. I mean, it's literally been rebranded in some ways as like it's Microsoft Gaming now, and I don't want to make it as simple as Xbox good, Microsoft bad. Xbox had its problems before this acquisition, and before it seemingly had more oversight from its parent company. But that does come with that sort of unification across the brand, like you said, and that kind of like lack of identity. And why I get so enraged and why we do so many of these videos is because I thought they were just getting there. I invested in the Series X in it, like thinking about all of the great developers that they had bought, all of the acquisitions they had made, and hoping for the best, naively hoping that the Activision deal will result in higher quality Call of Duty games and their staff would be treated better, and we would get a better pipeline of production and that they could help rather than hinder any of the franchises or studios that they were buying up. And just when it felt like they were getting some momentum and announcing games that I think look amazing, like Fable or even Perfect Dark or Gears of War ED, Avowed, the Outer Worlds 2, an absolutely banging slate in my opinion. Just as they were starting to get that momentum, and maybe not, but maybe paying off all of the investments they've made over the past 10, 15 years. It was just then that things changed, and I don't know whether that's a Phil Spencer and Xbox issue or if it's a Microsoft issue, but there has been a change, and that's what hurts me the most, and that's what gets me the most emotive about these videos and these topics, is because I feel, and I could be wrong, I feel like they were just there. I feel like it was just about to pay off, and now everything is more tumultuous than maybe ever.
Yeah, and it's in regards to the layoffs and the general business side of it, I think those are the news stories that keep bubbling up, and you get quotes like this about how much of a mess it is. It's a disaster, like specifically using those words. And even a report about what it was like when Phil Spencer was working with Sarah Bond and the new leadership in Matt Booty right at the beginning of trying to bring all this stuff together, and Sarah Bond saying, it's not my job to do what he tells me to do, it's my job to do what he meant. And that idea of them trying to sort of figure out how do they become this three-pronged leadership team, which was also touched on when the layoffs happened that I mentioned before in regards to Tango and those other developers, where you had another head of Xbox, Matt Booty, just saying, well, there were too many teams for me to look after, so we kind of had to get rid of some of them. Not in that many words, but that is very much what those quotes were indicating. And overall, at some point you would hope they hit that cadence of releases. That's what they've built all of this stuff on, and they have failed to hit that. So maybe this year is another write-off after over a decade of write-offs at this point.
I will say, you want to know something?
Yes.
I hope they bring that handheld out, because I think that might kill Nintendo for me in a way.
What do you mean?
I'm going to tell you why. Obviously, the Nintendo Switch 2 I'm looking forward to. I'm looking forward to those first-party games.
Yes.
But this is just, I just ruined the entire audience is about to turn against me now. How do I say this? The Nintendo Switch 1 was really great at being a sort of indie machine.
Yes.
I think you would agree.
Yes.
However, Game Pass, for me, is better at being an indie machine, because you get a lot of those indie games day one for no extra cost. So if you can get a handheld that has Game Pass on it and all of those indie games, why would I, Josh Brown, ever boot up my Switch apart from the first party titles if I had that option? That's all I'm going to say.
No, that's true. I mean, there is, that's kind of the thing. There is potentially a niche in the market to hit in regards to making sure that the consumer sees a selection of titles a month and has access to them. If they could take the functionality from the Playdate, which is a very much overlooked indie handheld console with a crank on it, where that game, that console gives you a new title every few weeks, every month or so, and it's downloaded, it's ready for you to play. If there was something there that you could do that would hit the indie space, then maybe that would elevate Xbox again. I think at this point the conversation has shifted entirely into what games have you got for me, down the lens of what have you got that's going to compete with Ghost of Tsushima, Horizon, God of War, whatever the hell over on the Sony side, or Mario, Zelda, Splatoon, Kirby on the Nintendo side. What are the flagship titles? Because the Xbox brand was built on Halo, Gears, Fable, whatever, and they haven't been able to remotely get back to that in over a decade. So as much as they might do a handheld and it might be a Game Pass streaming system, that's kind of largely already covered by a ton of third-party peripherals anyway.
Yeah, but Fable's going to be Game of the Year next year, right? I genuinely maybe believe that.
Yeah,
Maybe.
we will see what the hell
Grand Theft Auto's out. Sorry, I'm just lying into your face. First party, best Xbox game. I don't know. Maybe I'm just looking forward to it really much. I don't want to end this on a negative note. I want to believe, Scott.
I also would like to believe.